Hello. Today's project is removing the funeral decoration from a Lionel Lincoln Funeral engine. This is the Nashville. It was a 440 built by the Cuyahoga Steam Furnace Company in August of 1851. As you see, it was a wood burner. It was built for the Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati Railroad, and it was made for both freight and passenger service. These are old photographs of the old Nashville at the Wilson Street Station in Cleveland, Ohio, April 28, 1865. The locomotive pulled the funeral train of Abraham Lincoln from Cleveland to Columbus, Ohio. Lionel's engine was made in 2013. I wanted to remove the funeral decoration so it could be run as just the Nashville as it was every other day than when it served funeral service. It has this bunting all over the engine. It was actually kind of a ribbon, and it was very difficult to remove because Lionel did a good job of adhering it, but it seemed a bit out of scale. I didn't like it, and I would rather have it off. It was actually quite a struggle to remove. I ended up using dental tools, and I figured out a system where I could kind of floss it like you would when you're flossing your teeth, and it would remove. On the ends there were even some glue. It was attached with glue in some areas, so it was quite difficult to get off. So I removed both the bunting and there were 3 Lincoln portraits that were on this engine, and luckily Lionel made those in a way that they could also be removed pretty easily. When I bought this engine, I wasn't sure if I would be able to do this. I just bought the engine alone, and I hope to convert it to a 2-rail engine. From now it's a 3-rail engine with big flanges and 3rd rail pickup. Well, as you all know, on the evening of April 14th, 1865, only 5 days after the Confederate surrender that would end the Civil War, an assassin shot President Abraham Lincoln. He died the next day at 7:22 a.m. The government rushed to make a funeral train. The funeral train had 9 cars, including a baggage car, a hearse car, and the president's car, which was built for the president and other officials. It contained a parlor, sitting room, and a sleeping apartment. The president's car was draped in mourning bunting and carried the coffins of Abraham Lincoln and his son Todd. New locomotives were substituted at several points along the path. The train went through 7 states and made stops in 12 cities, including Baltimore, Maryland, Harrisburg and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New York City, Albany and Buffalo, New York, Cleveland and Columbus, Ohio, and Indianapolis and Michigan City, Indiana. The funeral train arrived in Cleveland at Union Depot from Buffalo, New York at 6:50 a.m., April 28th, pulled by the locomotive L. Chase. Another engine, the Dispatch, pulled the 9-car train to the Euclid Street Station, and it arrived there at 7:20 a.m. The photographs I showed at the beginning are of the Nashville at Wilson Street Station in Cleveland, Ohio, April 28th, 1865, right before it pulled the funeral train from Cleveland to Columbus. The Nashville departed for Columbus at just after midnight on April 29th, 1865, and it arrived in Columbus at 7:50 a.m. The Nashville was just one of about 20 different locomotives used by various railroads to pull the Lincoln Funeral train over 1,600 miles from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois. But because of the series of photographs, it would become the most well-known that performed this service. I had a hard time removing the portrait on the front. I ended up having to loosen some screws that were holding the pilot in place so I could fit the screwdriver in. But working the ribbon out, it's really that flossing technique seemed to work the best. But it was a bit nerve-wracking to be working with such an expensive engine, to remove the decoration that they'd put on it, and hopefully not damage it, and make it so I could eventually, if I needed to, I could put it back on. So I saved everything I took off, and everything that was screwed in, like the portraits, I put the screws back in place so they wouldn't be lost. In places I used a hemostat, and other places I used like a little tweezers. Some places were easier than others. I found that if I could bunch all of the ribbon up in one area and then slide it over to the other side, it would loosen it up enough that I could pull it out. The ones attached to the handrails were really the most difficult because the whole handrail could pivot and spin in place. But in other places it was just easy to pull out, like that stanchion at the end. It was hard to tell what would be easy and what wouldn't. Lionel did do a very nice job, much better than their normal offerings on this engine. I was quite impressed. Getting in behind the portrait on the front was the most difficult. I had to loosen that front pilot so I could kind of push it down a little bit to get to the screw. The other portraits also are just screwed in place, the screw between the drivers. I thought it was interesting that the front driver on this model has no flange. I think that was true on some of the prototype 440s. Yeah, the 440 wheelbase, including this Nashville engine, they were really kind of a jack of all trades. They They could do passenger work as well as freight work. This engine has very high drivers, so I bet it was probably better for passenger service than freight. I bet it was pretty speedy. But it was interesting, the engine was over 12 years old when it was performing the service of pulling the presidential funeral train. I thought that was interesting. I imagine it was used because it was built in Ohio. The Cuyahoga company had closed before the Civil War. It closed in the 1857 financial panic. They stopped building locomotives. So I thought it was interesting that they would use an older engine to pull the presidential train, but I think it was probably more pride that it was an Ohio-built engine. Yes, a lot of nerve-wracking pulling on an engine that is otherwise in good shape. I don't think this engine was ever used. I was looking at the rollers and at the wheels, and there's no wear marks. It just seems brand new out of the box. Just used for display. This side of the handrail is actually a little more difficult than the other side because, as you can see, right behind the tweezer, there's a steam line that goes to the steam dome, and the handrail is on the other side, like it's between that pipe and the steam dome, so it's a little hard to get in there and kind of manhandle it out. I was really worried I was going to bend the handrail. I did, I think on this, actually end up pulling it out on one end accidentally, but I was able to push it back into the hole it had pulled out of the cab. Yeah, you can see me about to do it right now. Yeah, there it goes. Whoops. So trying not to damage it more than I have to, but getting between all of those delicate lines. Yeah, all of the plumbing being on the outside of the engine. It looks really cool, but it's very hard to get at. Makes it very difficult to touch anything on these. I was able to seat it back into place. Get that last little bit out. Yeah, this front piece just doesn't want to let go. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, this is me trying to get that handrail back into the hole it came out of in the cab. Yeah, I don't know why I really gravitate towards very early steam engines. I think it's that I grew up in kind of Alexandria, DC area, and spent a lot of time at the Smithsonian, the Museum of American History, with the trains there. They have the John Bull and a whole machinery hall. So I do love early machinery that is painted and pinstriped, and I also spent a lot of time visiting the B&O Museum in Baltimore. So yes, early steam I really am very interested in. Yeah, the one thing about this engine that I think is interesting is this kind of brass spiral on the front. I've seen several Cuyahoga engines that have that. It was like a detail calling card. Here I'm putting those screws that I took out of the portraits back in place so I don't lose them. I mean, I'm willing to accept those little bumps where they stick out. They weren't there on the prototype, but they were there for Lionel to put their Lincoln portraits on. I'm willing to overlook that. But that third rail roller has to go. I have to put the screws back into the pilot. An interesting thing about the pilot, which I think is great, is that the drawbar on the front that was used for Lincoln pin coupling, the drawbar on the front is actually functional. You could use it for switching cars on the front of the engine, or for pulling in reverse, pulling cars using the pilot. So yeah, just returning screws back to where they came from. And there we go. Oh, the last thing is taking off that third rail roller. I was surprised how easily this came out, and it's not wired. There was a plastic cover that insulated it from the frame, and there's the screw actually is the conductor to make the electric connection. You can see that unpainted nut in there. That is the electric connection for the third rail pickup. So the next thing I have to do is find some scale wheels that are insulated that I can put on this engine. And then everything that I took off, I put in a little bag to hold for later. And there it is, all completed and finished. Defuneralized Lincoln Funeral train engine, the Nashville. Interesting thing on the front of this, you couldn't see it because of the portrait, but the smoke box front has an eagle on it, kind of outline of an eagle. Pretty neat. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll return to this project and continue making it a two-rail engine. Thank you.